absolutely absurd that the College Football Hall of Fame is keeping these coaches out because of this stupid rule. All right, guys, switching gears here. We talked a couple of weeks ago. Big G over there, Gorgeous G, is a voter for the NFF, the National Football Foundation, and voted this year in the Hall of Fame. But the more we dived in depth about this a couple of weeks ago, but then this past week, Les Miles filed a lawsuit in Baton Rouge against the LSU Tigers, his former team, because they vacated some wins, and they said it made him ineligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. So that took me down a deep dive into what makes people eligible, what makes people not eligible, and how some of these coaches are being left out that, quite frankly, should be first ballot Hall of Famers. So we're going to start with this. The National Football Foundation, which creates the Hall of Fame, has created the following criteria for coaches to get in. So that it has to be 3 full seasons after their retirement, or immediately following their retirement if they're 70, or if they're still an active coach, which there's not that many, but if you're 75 years or older, you can be an active coach and still be inducted. So, there's that. And then secondly, must have been a head football coach for a minimum of 10 years and must have coached at least 100 games with a minimum winning percentage of 0.60. 0.60. So let's start off with you, JT, in the outdoors today. Let's start with you. Are those requirements fair requirements? Are those good guidelines to have?
It's the tough thing about requirements is you got to start somewhere. And I mean, when I look at that, you need to coach 100 games. That makes sense. You need to have a little bit of age on you. That makes sense. I know the big question mark here comes down to 60%. 60% wins. But let me remind you that anything below 60% would be an F in school. So I don't know that I'm really upset that you've got to have 60% wins. I mean, let's be honest. We're talking about Hall of Fame level. Hall of Fame. This isn't, oh, you did good, you get a pat on the back. This is the elite of the elite. Something about the 60% doesn't bother me. If it was maybe 75, 80%, that's maybe unrealistic. But 60%, when you have to put a metric into place, I think 60% seems like a fair number.
Well, G, that goes to you. I mean, is it a fair number? Is it in the College Football Hall of Fame has consistently made that a stringent requirement. That is a hard requirement for them. Is it fair that 60% is a hard requirement? Are these other rules fair in themselves?
I mean, you got to look at this. All right. So Nick Saban's on that ballot this year. Greatest of all time. You can't argue with that. He won over 87% of his games at the University of Alabama. They only lost 29 games. Okay. What is it? 6 national titles, 5 national, I can't remember. He's won so many. But that to me is the echelon standard, right? Like that's greatest of all time. So now we start going down the rungs a little bit. But that's the top comparison, right? So now we're talking about, to JT's point, the just getting in. And quite frankly, everybody's going to be glad that Nick Saban's off the ballot, because then now we can be having discussions about who's going to get in.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of coaches out there that just because you get on the ballot doesn't mean you're going to make the Hall of Fame. So the discussion is just eligibility requirements, not really if you are a Hall of Fame coach. So I go back to this important factor. The players, to be a player, to be eligible, you have to be first team All-American. And I think a lot of that is consensus All-American, but there's if you go back in history, there's a debate between media outlets that publish first team All-American lists that the NFF, National Football Foundation, doesn't even recognize. And those cats aren't getting on the ballot. So to me, that is a larger conversation because, quite frankly, they did qualify as first team All-American. But we're talking about coaches, and we're talking about 60% win percentage. I think it's a fair bar. I think you've got to hold the bar. But I have a stat here, okay, that debunks this whole entire conversation. As of 2024, there are over 32 coaches on the Hall of Fame that have below a 600% or a 0.60 or 60% win percentage. So the rule has already been modified to allow those in, or it changed after the fact. So if we're talking about a matter of percentages, like tenths, decimal points, I mean, like, come on, man. Like, That's
All
where
Well,
right,
we're
G,
at.
you gotta go deeper on that one, man. Tell us about this. I thought this 60% was a hard
I
line.
mean, it seems like, I've even got a quote, from Steve Hatchell, the president, that says, quote, once you get wiggly with the criteria, what do you say doesn't matter? What do you say matters and what doesn't?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. One thing I don't want to pass over, G, you're right. Nick Saban got to be the GOAT, got to be the greatest of all time.
Hey, what was
But
his overall? What was his overall
it was
savings?
seven. We looked at it the other week. I think it was a 0.778, 76, 78,
Wow.
something like that. It was
Wow.
significantly high. But the most impressive thing is Nick Saban did it in the SEC. That's it's kind of goes back to the debate between boxing and UFC as you look at those records. In boxing, you can't have an L on your record. It's all about your wins. It's all about your undefeated as they're promoting you. It's about as few losses as possible. In MMA and the UFC, it's okay to have those L's as long as they're against quality opponents. So if you're losing to a Conor McGregor, if you're losing to an Israel Adesanya, Francis Ngannou, or somebody like that, then that actually helps you as opposed to hurts you because you have fought those battles with those people. And in a league like the SEC, I think it should be more of a sliding scale because you're playing a higher competition. It's not like, and with due respect to our friends from the Sun Belt, it's not like being in the Sun Belt and getting a winning record. Having a .60 in the SEC is different, and having that quality of offense, having that quality of coaching skills is a lot different. So it's hard to say you've got to have a criteria, you've got to look at it, but it's hard to say that there shouldn't be exceptions here. And as Graham just pointed out, there's already made exceptions. And I think the exceptions go into some interesting points as we go along here because I want to talk about we're going to start with the Les Miles, but then I want to talk about my favorite coach that's being left out of the Hall of Fame, the Pirate King himself, Mike Leach. But let's start with Les Miles because I think you bring up a great point here. So Les Miles filed the suit in Louisiana, and it stems from this. In 2023, LSU vacated 37 victories that the school football program had between 2012 and 2015 over Vidal Alexander, who was a defensive, I think he was a defensive end, receiving financial benefits that were illegal at the time, but of course now are perfectly legal under NFL. And if anything, the guy's feeling like he probably got a little gypped on the amount of money he got back then versus now. So they vacated those wins. By the way, they vacated them in 2023 as part of an investigation into the school's basketball program, not
Yeah.
even the football program. And so they just gave away these wins. But that affected Miles's record because he went from an official career record of 145 wins and 73 losses, which gave him a .665 winning percentage, down to 108 and 73, which is a .597. So 3/10 off because of these victories being vacated. But again, LSU vacated the victories because of a violation of the rules then, not a violation of the rules now. So we've already seen it change. What do you think about that, JT? Should it count for what happens on the field, or should it count? Should we reward cheating or not? What should happen based off of that?
Two things. I do think it's interesting that when they vacate wins, they don't count against you as losses. So when you do that math, it's like the games never happened.
Yeah,
Number two is he left LSU. He went over to Kansas, and I think he ran something like 3-18. Hey, Les, if you're mad about your record, maybe you should have done a better job at Kansas because the coach that came in after you sure did saw some winning seasons come after there. But look, Les Miles, I get it. I don't know that he's a Hall of Fame coach. I know it's just the right to have your name on this thing, but this thing feels ego driven. It feels like he's still got an axe to grind for how LSU let him go and kind of how that divorce happened between the coach and the team. But it just looks petty. I try to put myself in his
petty
position.
by who? Petty by who? By
Pe-
Miles or by
petty by
LSU?
miles, by
Okay.
miles. Look, LSU vacating wins, doing what they're having to do to not get NCAA violations. Like, I get it. They're not looking at the coach's Hall of Fame record. They're looking at, hey, this program had some issues. We've got to make sure that we cover ourselves. We've got to keep our championship hopes alive. We're going to negotiate and we're going to do things that are proactive. Yes, it did happen to knock off his percentage to get him there, but he's not a Hall of Fame coach anyway. And again, I think the unceremonious timing and process of him being let go from LSU drives this lawsuit now. What's he? I mean, if I read it right, Bob, and you're our legal expert, he's suing for them to count the wins. It's not monetary or anything like that, right? Like he wants
Correct.
them to add.
It's for a declaratory judgment to say that they have wronged him. that by vacating those wins, and that since they voluntarily vacated those, they should voluntarily reinstate those so that it counts against his record. And I don't think that they actually specified, but I think if they reinstate two of those, then that would go ahead and count. And by the way, over this time, I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I do think Les Miles is a Hall of Fame coach based off the requirements, based off what he did. Listen, the man won national championship at LSU. He did a wonderful job. He performed well in the SEC. Maybe did not perform well after the SEC, but he won a national championship. He did it with the talent he had. So based on that, I do think that he should be in the consideration. Certainly, after we looked at the names a couple of weeks ago, to me, he has more consideration and has more validation of being there than some of those other coaches do.
You mean that talent that Nick Saban gift wrapped and left him as soon as he left?
What did he do with it when the emperor takes over with a new army? What does he do with the army?
You said the talent that he had. He had the best talent in America.
Best talent in America and won a national.
All you got to do is take the keys.
He did what he was supposed to do. He did what he was supposed to do, which is win a national championship.
Hey, Bubba. Is Chiswick going to be a Hall of Fame coach to you too then?
Chiswick doesn't have 100 wins. Chiswick has 14 wins, and they're all because of Cam Newton.
Look, national
Cam
title.
Newton might as well be counted as the coach of the Auburn team from when he won the national championship.
I don't think Les Miles
Jack this morning.
Baby, I am HOTTOGO hot to go this morning. I'm telling you.
Look, I don't like legal action like this. I think if you've gotten to this point, everybody loses. It just feels petty to me. But look, this is where we disagree. I think if Les Miles makes it to the ballot, because let's be clear, he's suing for the right to get on the ballot. I don't think there's any chance in hell he's going to actually win and get into the College Hall of Fame as a coach. And so all of this is petty because this gives him headlines now. It's all about this 5 minutes of fame of a coach that nobody even thinks about anymore. And it just comes off wrong to me. So that's my take. G, tell me why I'm wrong on this.
So I'm going to attack this from two fronts. Okay. First, let's just start with taking Les Miles out of the equation as a coach. And let's look at this from, and this is the National Football Foundation's criteria in their evaluation. But let's get to the NCAA, who has continually proven themselves as a defunct organization that has no moral high ground, that has no benchmark of holding any lines. They're incapable of having any governmental regulation. So let's start with Reggie Bush in reviving his Heisman Trophy. They are retroactively going back and changing history. Okay. So if we want to penalize programs and coaches, and if I understand Les Miles' situation correctly, it's what is it? Wallace Wade, the basketball coach. Yeah. A lot of that stemmed from him, even though there's incidents on the LSU football program, right? And they just as a safeguard to kind of minimize the hurt, they kind of went this way. Well, let me finish here. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if we're going to retroactively put things back on the board because the NCAA doesn't have a spine, then this is a situation that you retroactively put back on the board. But then you got to go to every program. I mean, there's so many programs that have vacated wins because of these types of things that is all now legal. Okay, so you got to make up your mind, but the NCAA they've already laid down their cards and say, we're going to go back and do these things. So at least be consistent. Be consistent in it. Even if it's got an asterisk by it, but he gets to keep the wins, that's fine with me. All right. So it's an eligibility requirement. So to me, he should have those wins. And that gets him at 145. It gets him over the 6.600. All right. So second front, Les Miles, not Hall of Fame coach. Period. So this whole debate is rather stupid because he's not a Hall of Fame coach. He never will be. And he shouldn't be on the ballot because he's just going to take another spot. And there's only two coaches at each echelon that you can vote for. And with only two coaches going in per year, do you think Les Miles' name is going to make the cut? No way. It's never going to make the cut. If you take away his wins, he's sitting at 108, which is barely over the requirement. You take away the talented roster that he inherited, and you look at where he coached at Oklahoma State, 28-21 was his record. He left LSU. He went 3-18 at Kansas. The only year, and hear me out here, that he really made a name for himself was 2011 when he had the team of the year. And had he beaten Alabama in that national title game, instead of getting shut out and not making it past the 50-yard line, then we would have a greater level of conversation. But that is what we're looking at.
Can I
That's
clarify?
what we're looking at.
Is that the year that LSU beat him in the regular season?
It was the game of the year. Yeah, in Tuscaloosa.
So in other words, they were 1-1 against Alabama that year.
When it mattered most, this is the Hall of Fame.
So it does not matter during the regular season.
It's the Hall of Fame. It's the Hall of Fame.
This always comes back to Saban in Alabama.
Look, there are those that make it, and then there are those that don't. And nobody says, well, hey, the guy that fell short when it mattered most, that's a guy we're going to enshrine in history forever. No, they give it to the guy that wins them, not the guy that doesn't win them. And that's the Hall of Fame.
And that's
why Gene Chizik should get one.
That's why Gene Chizik deserves one. Tuberville never won an Natty. Gene Chizik did. Give it to Gene Chizik.
But again, JT, you made a great point. I think this is about kind of just taking the knife and jabbing it in LSU because he's bitter about it.
Well, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm hearing from you here. Is from both of you actually is you can look at the requirements. You can look and say, well, you satisfy this or you didn't satisfy that. You did do this or you won a national championship, but maybe you did it with other people's players. You had these wins, but they got vacated. So what does it come down to though? If we're taking all this away because this is still a young enough thing, doesn't it come down to the eye test? And what both of you are telling me is that Les Miles doesn't pass the eye test.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing from both of you right now? He does not pass the eye test.
100%.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Okay. I mean, criteria is there to set a substandard. I mean, you have to have something, just like we have grades, just like we have, work and reports and everything else. You have to have a base level. That's all those numbers are. If you don't hit that minimum threshold, we got a real issue. And I know that's what we're going to talk about this next coach, because this is the one I'm far more torn on.
That's exactly because let's talk about somebody that does meet the eye test. Let's talk about somebody that changed college football. And I'm talking about Mike Leach, the Pirate King himself. Swing your sword. By the way, guys, I know I've been on. I've told y'all, anybody that hasn't read it, go out right now and buy Mike Leach's autobiography, Swing Your Sword. It covers through his time at Texas Tech. Honestly, it's a great book. Not only a great read, it's a great life lesson. It's a great book. I didn't realize Mike Leach had gone to law school at Pepperdine and then left law school to become a college football coach without ever playing college football. Like, crazy story. Love this guy. Innovated the air raid offense. He coached for 23 years as a head coach. 158 and 107 win-loss record, with victory coming from Texas Tech, Washington State, and Mississippi State. That's a .594 win percentage. He passed in 2022 between the Egg Bowl, which is the rivalry game between Mississippi State and Ole Miss, which he won, and the bowl game. By the way, Mississippi State won that bowl game after his unfortunate death. Leach's 2 victories from missing the cutoff. Mike Leach revolutionized college football through the air raid offense. His coaching tree underneath him is a who's who of college and NFL coaches right now. If anybody meets the eye test to me, it's Mike Leach. And if you're already making exceptions for other people, Mike Leach is the guy you make the exception for. What are your thoughts? Mike Leach off 2 games. Arguably, I would say 1 game. I still think Mike Leach was the head coach in spirit of those Mississippi State Bulldogs during that bowl game. Mike Leach off 1 game, 2 games, however you want to put it. But looking at his career, looking at where he did it, that he took these undersized programs and made them into monsters. What do y'all think about Mike Leach being a couple of votes short? And should an exception be made for Mike Leach? Grambo, let's go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at this as they do the college football playoff, or the way that they used to look the college football playoff, where only 2 get in, and then you start with a standard and requirements, but then you do the eye test, and then you negotiate it and debate it with a board. And I believe there is a board, and I think Archie Griffin leads that from Ohio State, former 2-time winner.
Yeah.
But I think that's the appropriate way. We are talking about a coach that revolutionized the game. He he developed an offense that has changed the landscape of college football in the way that is played now. And to your point, Bubba, he went into programs where he didn't inherit the best class in America, and he had to invent a system that maximized the subpar talent that he had, and he turned that subpar talent into like some of the top passing in like passers in the in college football history. Who is the all time leading passer right now? Do you guys have that stat?
Not
Go
off the
through and
top of
look
my
at them.
head.
I'm pretty sure Mike Leach has coached these guys, right? You can probably say it within the top 10. He's probably got two. I don't know. I'm throwing a stat out there, but I think it's pretty logical to say that he's done that. He has done more with less than any coach out there, and he's coached in the hardest conferences to do that. And so for him to fall a few wins short by something that was completely not in his control, I think it's worth the conversation. I think this is one of those where the board needs to look at this and say, hey, based on his impact of the game and what he's done, he's revolutionized it, and he is definitely eligible.
Yeah, I was shocked that he didn't have the 60%, to be honest. I mean, when you look at the offenses and the teams he's put out there, but to your point, G, he takes teams that are underperforming or teams that haven't, done anything in a while, and he builds them. And let's not forget, he's probably the best post-game interview coach ever in college football. I mean, you always wanted to hear what he had to say at the end of a game. You know, earlier I did talk about, I think you've got to have minimum standards. If there ever is a time for exceptions, I think it's looking at this scenario. I mean, he's not retired. He didn't leave. He passed away, and so I think there's some extenuating circumstances that go on when you're looking at a coach like Leach and his record out there. So he'd be one of the ones that I would say I'd love to see an exception made for. Bubba, you may have the list there in front of you. Did some of those losses start because, to your point earlier, he went to law school. He came out and started coaching. Did it take some of those early coaching gigs into account, some of those lower
So,
divisions?
Leach actually, all of his lower division coaching was as an offensive coordinator. So
Okay.
he joined Hal Mommy first and foremost at a little school in Kansas. I cannot remember the name of it. They then went to Valdosta State, Titletown, USA, arguably. They were coaches over there, where, by the way, they had a young quarterback named Chris Hatcher, who's now under the Mike Leach coaching tree as well. Shout out to Sanford University. They went from Valdosta State up to Kentucky, him and Hal Mummy together, developing this together. Then Leach directly took his talent straight to Texas Tech. Leach was the head coach at only three schools: Texas Tech, Washington State, and Mississippi State. And it's not the early parts of lower programs that's counting against him. It's rebuilding these schools. It's
Yeah.
taking it's waiting 2 or 3 years to get into his talent to maximize what he has in those first couple seasons. Every time you look at it, his later seasons are better than his first seasons because he's rebuilding the schools the way that a college coach should. And again, I think that's when it
Yeah.
comes back to the eye test. Is we talk about Les Miles. Did Les Miles come in with a heap of talent and win a natty? Absolutely. And I think the better comparison, we compared him to Chiswick. It's just as easy to compare him to Ed Orgeron. Ed
Mhm.
Orgeron won a natty with a tremendous amount of talent. Does
Yeah.
that make him a Hall of Fame coach? I don't think so. Mike Leach, on the other hand, had no talent and built it up from nothing. And to me, that is the sign of a great coach.
Yeah.
And if he was given the opportunity, and quite frankly, I think he would have been given the opportunity at Mississippi State, to where I think he could have been a Bobby Bowden, a Joe Paterno, a Nick Saban, where he's creating this dynasty program through his actions and through his recruitings that he never really had the ability to do so. His time at Texas Tech was, of course, ruined by boosters and by the proven faults. By the way, Mike Leach won the lawsuit when he sued Texas Tech, and I cannot remember the ESPN analyst's name right now, whose son that he allegedly did something to that was later proved to be false. Leach won that lawsuit.
Yeah.
He,
Locked him in a closet or something is what they accused
he
him
did
of.
not. That's what they accused him of. Did not
Yeah.
do it. But by the way, in his book, he does talk about creative punishments for creative things. He wouldn't let the kid practice, so the kid he told the kid to go inside. He's not going to watch practice, and the kid played on his cell phone the entire time, and just his dad made something of it. I cannot remember the analyst's name. Got fired for that unjustly. Filed a lawsuit, won the lawsuit. Went to Washington State, the Cougars, turned the Cougars into a great program up there, and then had his opportunity to come to the SEC, back to the SEC, arguably because he was in Kentucky with Hal Mumme back when Mumme had those great years with the great, my favorite quarterback, by the way, was it Tim Couch, the big boy, the big hoss. But he came back to the SEC and he got things rolling in the SEC. I think the only team that he had a losing record against in his 3 seasons at Mississippi State was actually Alabama. Like he was rolling through. He was 2-1 against Auburn, 2-1 against Ole Miss, like 3-0 against Vanderbilt. I mean, he was building something prior to his unfortunate passing. And when you want to talk about, again, meeting the eye test, maybe he doesn't meet the standards, but he met the eye test, and that's to me what counts.
Yeah.
Grandmo, I mean, you tell me here. You know,
Few,
you're the voter, man. Should they make an exception for Mike Leach?
yeah, few PTI corrections here. So Craig James was the
Craig James, thank you.
Craig James, and his son was Adam. So, and then Tim Couch. I think you're confusing him with Jared Lorenzen.
I
But
was
Tim
like,
Couch
come
was
on,
like
Jared
yes,
Tim Couch, one of the
100%.
greatest, if not
100%.
the greatest QBs in
Coached both of them, coached
Kentucky
both of them,
history.
by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am confusing Tim Couch and Jared Lorenzen.
So again, we come down for this. You're asking me. This is a conversation to get eligible for the ballot. He's not eligible yet. So next year, this really heats up and gets absolutely yes. Make him eligible for the ballot. He deserves to be in. These things have a way of taking care of themselves. I said that about Les Miles. Absolutely yes. Make him eligible for the ballot because these things will take care of themselves. And at 2 coaches a year, it's going to be really hard unless they just make the perfect year to really say these guys will get into the Hall of Fame because there's just so many great coaches. So I think the question is how long is his name going to hang around on a ballot to get an opportunity to get in there? To me, I would sling a vote to Mike Leach. I think the guy, in terms of coaching and his brain and what he's been able to accomplish and do with those universities, that's as Hall of Fame as it gets. I mean, he was never handed the keys to a Cadillac. He was never given the best facilities, the best ability to recruit. He had to build an offense and then go find the talent that nobody else was going to do. And he had to find ways to put the top programs on roller skates on defense and attack them. And nobody wanted to play Mike Leach. I think you go talk to his peers that he coached against and say, who do you not want to play? And Mike Leach is at the top of that list. And if that is in the realm of pure respect, I think that absolutely makes him a Hall of Fame.
I mean, anytime you invent an offense that's now common term, I mean, you've done something special. You've done something that most will never be able to do. I mean, what he's done with the air raid. I mean, the same for the coaches that invent the spread or the West Coast offense. I mean, you've done something unique. You've done something special. You've done something that's Hall of Fame worthy.
And to me, that is Hall of Fame worthy. It's from him. It's from what he's done. It's from the coaching tree that he's left. The air raid is still a boogeyman today. Just ask people that have played Cliff Kingsbury, Lincoln Riley, Chris Hatcher, any of his disciples of that air raid offense, any of his quarterbacks from that. But guys, I think I've got an easy solution here to this problem.
Hold on,
go ahead.
1 second, Bob. You made a really great point about his coaching tree and what they've been able to accomplish. I mean, just look at that. They've taken his offense and they've amplified it and they've been able to replicate it and it works elsewhere at all levels. And we mentioned Chris Hatcher at Samford University. We made I say we because we are Samford, national semifinals run for a team that never ever should have had an opportunity to be there to play North Dakota State, the Bison. So that just goes to show you how you can create something that does more with less. And resume and coaching tree speaks for itself. Go ahead, Mike.
Here's my solution to the problem. Let's go back to the GOAT, Nick Saban. Nick, you're making the Hall of Fame this year. You deserve it. You absolutely.
Right.
Listen, you got a little padding on that record right here. If we're going to learn anything, let's learn from Les Miles. Nick, I just need you to vacate 2 wins versus LSU. Doesn't have to be the Natty. or excuse me, 2 wins against Mike Leach. Doesn't have to be from a national championship season. Let's keep it preserved. All you have to do is vacate 2 of those victories against Mike Leach, and they're not going to count as losses against him. And then he can be in the Hall of Fame with you. Nick Saban, I'm calling you out. Be a leader. Be a leader, Nick. Vacate 2 victories and let Mike Leach into the College Football Hall of Fame. I think that's the solution here. Doesn't
Well,
stop you from being the GOAT, baby, but
I
it helps
believe
somebody out.
I believe he has vacated wins. I don't know what it was during that 2007 season, but they wouldn't have been against Leach. I think.
No, we can do it from 8. Listen, he won like 12 national championships while Leach was at Mississippi State for 3 years.
Yeah.
Nick, just go
Oh
ahead
my
and
goodness.
vacate 2 of them against Mike. I know
That's
you
all,
got two.
that's all you. That's all you got to do.
Just vacate 2. That's
Very
it. That's the solution. Well,
I
guys,
mean, the NCAA will take it. They'll take any vacated wins.
yeah,
That's a
they'll
win in
take
their
anything.
book.
Nobody
I think they have a
cares.
chart on their walls. How many vacated wins do we get this year?
All we need
That's
now
funny.
is someone going in the College Football Hall of Fame for vacating wins, and it might be Urban Meyer. You never know.
So that's a whole nother conversation. We'll debate that one about
I'm just
Urban Meyer.
winding Graham up
Urban
today.
Meyer on the ballot. Yeah.
Just winding him up today.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it comes down to this. Les Miles may deserve to be on the ballot, may not. Mike Leach definitely deserves to be on the ballot. Any way you look at it, the requirements by the National Football Foundation are good starting points, but they shouldn't be stringent. And there should be an element, as there is on the field, there should be an element of the eye test. You know, Vegas odds makers and everybody else looks at the field beforehand and they can tell you without a shadow of the doubt who wins. But then you play the game. And once you play the game, you never know what's going to happen. And that's what makes football great, is because once you start playing the game, anybody can win it. And in this particular occasion, Mike Leach, the great underdog, the Pirate King, should have done enough to make his way onto the ballot and, more importantly, make his way into that Hall of Fame. So I'm starting right now. Mike Leach, whatever we need to do, we're going to make it a mission to help you into the Hall of Fame. And the National Football Foundation, guys, you got to really reevaluate yourself because you got a good starting point, but you've got a responsibility to college football. And that responsibility is not being fulfilled by keeping somebody like Mike Leach off the ballot.